Hi. So today we begin our study of the second largest religion in the world, and that is Islam. 1.6 billion people on earth are a member of this beautiful, deep, diverse tradition called Islam. That's 1 out of 4 people on earth. So it is incumbent on all of us to become religiously literate about what Islam means. But I have to tell you, as a professor of comparative religion and philosophy and humanities, everywhere I go, I'm confronted again and again by an almost willful ignorance around the religion of Islam, a recalcitrance, a resistance to learning about what it is and how deeply it is interwoven into the Judeo-Christian world. So I'm particularly motivated today to, over the next few videos, unpack the jewels in this treasure chest called Islam. But there are challenges. I mean, let's be real. Here in the United States and in the West particularly, there are challenges around studying Islam. You know, I'll never forget it. On September 12th, 2011, the morning after 9/11, President George Bush got on TV and he looked into the camera, he looked into the eyes of America, and he said, "We are not at war with Islam." I mean, I guess you could say he tried, but no one heard him. And ever since then, and it had been going on a long time before then, but particularly ever since then, in this post-9/11 world, there's a lot of pain and a lot of struggle on all sides of this question of how to integrate Islam into the rest of everything, and how to learn how to not see it as the other. So there's a lot of work to be done around understanding Islam, and most of the work has to happen inside of us, right? So that's the struggle we have in the post-9/11 world, and also the opportunity. You know what I also remember about those heady weeks and months and years right after 9/11 was that on university campuses all across America, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian college students looked at each other and said, "We're tired of having our religions defined by our fathers. We need to step into leadership. We need to reunite the Abrahamic family. We need to restore the promise of the one God and the deep interconnectedness between all of the people in the world, in the Abrahamic family and outside of it." So, you know, I suppose you could say that 9/11 generated a new urgency around the question of repairing rifts that were often ignored for way too long. So, as is often the case, we are in a crisis, and we are also in a time of opportunity. So, what is Islam? Let's start with the basic stage upon which we're going to build all the rest of our work in our Islamic studies. As I said, the second largest religion in the world, 1.6 billion people, 1 out of 4 people on earth. It is also often framed as the fastest growing religion on the planet. And let's do a little basic vocabulary housekeeping. The vocabulary of Islam comes from Arabic, and the word Islam means the peace that comes with submission to God. And the word Muslim means one who submits, one who surrenders. So at the core of the Islamic experience is this spiritual concept of submission or surrender. We've used other words to describe it in different traditions. You know, in Taoism, we talked about Wu Wei, that state of creative allowance. In the Gospels, Jesus counsels us to not worry, to not be anxious, to trust that we are supported by an all-knowing, all-powerful God. In Judaism, too, we know and learn that in the protective omniscience of God's covenant. We are collaborating with him to restore justice, and we are supported in all of those endeavors if and when we get, and now this is how the Buddha might put it, if and when we get our egos out of the way and we let go and we move into cooperative alignment with the divine. I know some people are triggered by the word surrender. They think, wait a minute, I don't want to surrender to anything. I'm in charge. Well, think about the word surrender not as a personal attack on your autonomy and independence, but as a wisdom stance of deep cooperativeness with what is. Now, it's also worth just emphasizing and affirming again that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all collectively known as the Abrahamic faith. They all worship the same God. Again, I'm surprised by how many people I meet who are under the misconception that Muslims have their God and Jews and Christians have their God. It is all the God, and in Arabic, the God is Allah. So Allah is the word for that same biblical God, the God of Abraham and all the prophets, through Jesus, through Muhammad. There's a through line through all three of these religions. Muhammad called Jews and Christians the people of the book and held them in special esteem and accord in the early decades of the formations of the movement. We'll get to Muhammad. We'll get to Muhammad in a few minutes here. So, you know, it's a shame. And I don't know whose fault it is that extremists get all the attention. And the vast majority of the world's 1.6 billion Muslims are today living peacefully alongside their Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, atheist, secular neighbors. All is well. But that's not going to be in the news today because it's boring. When people get along and look after each other like neighbors should and do all over the world, that's not going to be in the news. The most horrible thing that happens today on earth will be in the news. So maybe most of the blame lies with us as uncritical consumers of media. And I don't think you can blame the media either because they're in a double bind here. They have to get viewership, and so they tend to give us what we want. Occasionally a kitten rescued from a tree, but most of the time people doing horrible things to each other. If it bleeds, it leads. So I don't think we can blame the media, and I think when we are confronted with the overwhelmingly depressing news that washes over us all the time, maybe we ought to look in the mirror and ask, why do we turn to the sensationalism of horror and then call that news? So the real story is buried way beneath the headlines, and that's the story that we can luxuriate in here today together as we continue to go deeper into our study of Islam. Now, you can't study Islam without thinking about Muhammad. So Muhammad, in Islamic consciousness, is not technically the founder of Islam. In Muslim thinking, Islam is much older than Muhammad. It goes all the way back to the dawn of time. But in a counterpoint sense and in a legitimate sense, the formal religion of Islam does begin with Muhammad. So who was he? Well, he was born in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, around 570 CE, and he died around 632 CE. And he spent a lot of time by himself. You know, his biographers say that he was a bit of a loner and a bit of an outsider. And Mecca was a big thriving city with lots of class disparity and wealth and so on. And he was kind of lost in the middle of all of that. He went to live for a time with caravan drivers, with the Bedouin, and he himself took a job as a caravan driver. running a camel line and transporting product. And so he's kind of a working class guy, but also a great reputation for passionate learner, great interest in a lot of different things. Of course, there is monotheism in Mecca in Muhammad's time. This is 500-600 years after Jesus. There's Jews and Christians everywhere. And there's also that sort of indigenous Arabic polytheistic animism. You know, the more sort of superstitious folk religion of the Bedouin and other Arabic peoples. Polytheism, you know, many, many gods. So it's a real kind of exciting time of religious and philosophical diversity. And up out of that arena comes Muhammad. Now, he marries Khadijah, his boss, 15 years older than him and the owner of the caravan company that he works for. And they have a remarkable partnership. In fact, there's a whole story to tell there about the amazing support that they give each other in this paradigmatic marriage in Islam of Khadijah and Muhammad. And it is around this time that he begins to receive the visions in a cave at Mount Hira, north of Mecca, where he would visit and sit in contemplation. And the story goes that the angel Gabriel, the same Gabriel from the Jewish and Christian Bible, the angel Gabriel comes to Muhammad and tells him, "You have been chosen by Allah to be the final prophet." And the story goes that he, you know, he's a sensible guy. He thought he was losing his mind. I mean, wouldn't you think you were cracking up if an angel came to you and said you were the prophet? But the story goes that his wife Khadijah really stepped in here to support him and encourage him to stay with this. And so in the accounts around Muhammad's life, over the next 22 years, Muhammad would receive these prophetic recitations, and he would recite them. And he doesn't know how to read or write, so he's not writing them down, but they're being memorized by people around him or written down. And after Muhammad's death, they are all collected together. And those collected recitations that came through the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad comprise the Qur'an. And we'll say more about the Qur'an and what it teaches later. But that's a remarkable origin story for one of the world's most potent scriptures, most powerful spiritual texts. Really the central pillar of all Islamic life, the Qur'an, the one standing miracle. And he began to teach during that early period, the early part of those 22 years. And it wasn't so well received in Mecca, Saudi Arabia. He was preaching things that ran counter to popular opinion. You know, he preached a kind of a high standard of moral rectitude, moral righteousness, no gambling, no alcohol, no lending money for interest. He started changing some of the rules, championing monotheism over the prevailing animistic polytheism of his time. So it got increasingly uncomfortable for him in Mecca. And he moved about 250 miles north to a town called Yathrib, which we'll later call Medina in honor of the Prophet. And there in Yathrib, he's about 52 when he goes up there. And there in Medina, where he stays for 15 years, that's where he really begins to establish what you and I know today as Islam. In that somewhat more rural farming community, in league with his Jewish neighbors and his Christian neighbors, again, calling them the people of the book, Muhammad began to build the community, build the lifestyle, build the guidelines that we would come to understand as Islam today. The prayer 5 times a day and all of the other rituals and observances of Islam really began in Medina. And eventually, after 15 years or so, Muhammad and an army come back south 250 miles to Mecca, and they reestablish the Kaaba, the ancient cubical temple that legend has it Abraham built with his son Ishmael 1,800 years before Jesus. And that Kaaba was a polytheistic temple, but Muhammad conquers Mecca and rededicates the Kaaba to the one true God, Allah. And so Muhammad plays a really unique role in Islam. He's not an avatar. He's not an incarnation. Islam doesn't do that. Islam is a lot like Judaism in a lot of ways, particularly in its ethical viewpoint and in its reliance on prophets. The word prophet comes from the Greek pro, meaning for, and fetus, P-H-E-T-E-S, fetus meaning to speak. So a prophet is someone who speaks for someone else. And thick throughout the Jewish and Christian and Islamic tradition is this idea of prophets, men who are chosen by God to speak God's teachings, God's words on behalf of God. The Hebrew Bible is built on that, and Islam looks back at the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible and says, you know what? We're just a continuation of that tradition. Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, the last guy in, and then the jar got closed. So Islam sees itself as the culmination, the completion, and in some ways the correction of the earlier traditions of Judaism and Christianity. And so what we need to do now is turn to the Qur'an and think about what exactly does the Qur'an teach. It's quite a different book from the Bible. There aren't the kind of long narrative arcs. It's just a collection of scenes and sayings and teachings. And yet it is understood by Muslims to be superior to the writings of the Jews and Christians because it is not written by men. It comes directly from the mind of God, if you accept that claim of direct transmission prophecy through the prophet Muhammad. So when we get back together on the other side, let's take up the question, what are the principal teachings of the Quran? And we are going to see some remarkable alignments with the basic biblical view and some very telling departures, especially from the Christian concepts. So I'll see you on the other side for the principles of the Quran.